Hey guys, and welcome back. Let's continue with our Python scripting. So last time we had a look at how we can get access to various items like a model, and under the model we saw how we could get access to the translation, and under the translation how to get access to the animation node, and under the animation node how to get the actual nodes which represent each of the keys. So we just load in something here. Each of the nodes, X, Y, and Z for the translation. And then again, how to get access to all the keys and the individual keys. So we're gonna skip a little bit away from this or switch to something else and switch back to the scene here. So we have the components in the scene. We also have a bunch of other stuff like audio, cameras, characters, and so on. So let's take a look at how we can access some of these items here. So we saw we could get access to things from the scene by typing. We had this variable up here where we get the access to the scene and storing that in the scene variable. So scene dot and control space. We can see we have, for example, cameras. So we can enumerate all the cameras in the scene in a similar way just by typing for. Let's just give this a name, object in. Like this. So that's going to give us all the cameras. So we have the perspective, the front, back, right, left, top, and bottom cameras. So these cameras are the ones that you will find up here under, orthographic, producer, front, left, right, back, and so on, and the perspective camera. So if you were to add another camera yourself, which you can do here, then you would get this camera here. So we had a camera added here and called this my camera. And then run this again. And we also get my camera. So as you see, I usually print these things out because that's just a good way of verifying that I have access to the object that I expect. So obviously you want to do something else with the camera in this case here, but it's just a way of verifying things. So if we just copy this and say what else do we have in the scene? We have, for example, we know we have characters. So in my particular case, I know I have two characters in this scene here, but yours will probably be different. Maybe you won't have anything. But I know I have a UE4 character and an IPy character. So that's how to get access to the characters here. You can add various things to your scene. We've seen how to create a camera here. So another way of creating items or objects in your scene is by, you can type in everything. As you remember from last time, we had this node up here saying an FB model is something with a spatial representation, which is something you can, like this, move around. And that means that, actually let me just make a few comments for this. Oops. Okay. So if we want to get or figure out what we can create, you can type in get model. And here you can see, since everything in here that is a model has a constructor of that same or corresponding asset, I would say, you'll find that, for example, a null, creating a null object, you have a similar one called FB model null. So in order to create a null object, which you would normally manually do by dragging in a null object like this, which you would maybe do something with, I don't know. That will give you this null object here. So in case we want to create something like this in Python manually, we could type in my null. And usually when you do this, you probably want to assign this to a variable because that way you can also show it. Because once you execute this statement, you're gonna get a null object called my null. We can see that if we execute this, and you get a null object. But as you can see, this null object we have here, that's the one I created manually, and we can't actually see that null object we just created called my null, although we can see it in the navigator. So I just delete this one for now again, and then assign this to a variable called my null, and then say my null show equals true. That's going to create this null here, and now we can see that it's visible. And just like that, we can do things like we can take in a cube. Here's a cube, and we do just exactly the same. Just type my cube equals fb model, and then find my model cube. Call this my cube. That's going to create a cube for you. That wasn't the cube. My cube is here. There we go. So this is one way of creating objects in your scene, in case you need to do that. And that's actually kind of handy. It's going to come in handy at some point. I won't give examples of this yet, but we'll probably take a look at it later on when we start expanding a little bit on this and doing something really practical with this, because right now we're just exploring what you can do and how you can access these things in here. So we should also make a comment for this. So create a null object, and so there's another way of creating objects. So we should actually maybe do something like my null, and that's by using the fb create method. It's called my fb create object. And again, if you don't know how to execute this, you can do things like this. Just do a begin and end parentis, and then execute it, and then it's going to say it's expecting one string parameter and another string parameter and then another string, so 3 in total, or another one where you have an integer as well. So the minimum number of arguments you can pass to this is 3 arguments. And again, if you need to figure out really how to call this, you want to start up the SDK, search for this. So as you see, I'm kind of repeating some of the stuff that I've done before. And here you can see a good example of how to call this. So we could copy this and dissect it and see if we can figure out what is going on with this and how to call it. So if we just paste this in here, then we can see we have a variable name in the beginning that's the same as my other null here. So we just delete that. And then we have a name here, something with browsing, templates, something and something. And if we take a look at the asset browser, we can see we have templates. So browsing, we don't see anything in here, but that's actually referring to the asset browser. So that's just fixed. So then we have templates, and then we have something called physical properties, and then you're going to see that as well here. And then in this case, we are creating a rigid body, so these two are the same. So I can already say that usually these two arguments are going to be the same. It's not always, and I haven't dive too deep into this, so I don't know exactly all the combinations and how you should call these, but it's up to you to experiment with that. So just to go with this same example of the null here, so let's say we wanted to create a primitive of a null. Then you then you would go to, we have the elements in here, and on the elements we have a null here. So I suppose you should type browsing and then templates, and instead of physical properties you would say elements. And see, it's not under primitive, so we shouldn't add primitive, so I guess we should just write null here and then type in this as well. My other null dot show, and that is creating a null object, as we can see here. So that's just a different way of doing the same as we did up here. So I don't know if there's a preferred way of doing this, but it's good to know that you can have these two ways of doing it. So this is an alternative way of creating a null object. Right. I think actually that is what I wanted to show in this video. It's not like it's too much, but it's still good to start to get acquainted with this, and I would highly suggest that you experiment with this a little bit, so you can see how to automate creation of things, how to get access to various things. And just like before, we can actually we can add a little something to this. So let's say I added this this cube here, this null here, this null object, which we called null. And if we wanted to if we just created it and we don't have access to it, but we want to select it or get a reference to it in the scene, we can do that in a number of ways. So that if we type in FB model list, I'm just going to do something in here and say models equals this, and for model print name. So this one is not going to print anything, obviously, but if we type in FB find, then we can see we can find model by label name, or we can find model by unique color ID. And we also have a find object by full name and by name. So if we use find model by label name and want to figure out how to call this, then again we can see it takes a list or a string. So I guess we can type in, we want our access to our null object, and then we want to assign this. So object is not iterable. Okay, so this one actually, this was my bad. The find model object by label name, this is actually returning a single object. So sorry about that. That was a bit of a mistake. Yeah, here we have a good example of it. It's gonna select just one item. So in case you want to get several models and you want to have the actual model, I guess you can do this in a number of ways. But one way I found out That you can do this is by using the other one of the other ones called find object by name. If we see what this takes, let's copy that. And hopefully we can find a good example of this. So find object by name. Find object by name. So we should have it here. So there's a pattern here, and then a component list, a false, and if we should search models only. So this one is probably going to be true. So we want a false. I don't know what that false is. Maybe we can see that in the Python SDK. Oops. This is actually not giving us too much information. I have that information somewhere, but we need the pattern that we want to search for. So we want to search for anything called null. So you do that by using the wildcard star and null, and you could maybe say anything. Yeah, well, whatever. And then we return, get the return out of in the component list. So component list, and then we had the false, which we don't know what it is, and then the true, because we only want models in here. So the component list, we want to declare here. So component list equals fb component like this, and that executes just fine. So now we can iterate that component list. Like this. And then we get our null. So that's one way of getting access to our null object. So you will notice one thing, and that is right now it's a component, and you don't have components don't have a translation and notation. So if you were to type in print component dot translation, well, it does. So that was actually quite interesting. I guess that's because we have this set to true. Yeah. Oh. What happens if I set this to false then? Still get it. Okay, that's actually quite convenient. I didn't think so. So I guess this is just gonna search in components, but I actually need to check something. Okay, so the FB component, can you identify component using combination up to blah blah blah. So yeah, that didn't really give me what I wanted. Each instance of an FB component contains a list of properties. So if an FB property accessible through the component list. So this is actually something that's going to come in handy at some point. So we should actually, let's see how much time we have on the video. So 20 minutes. Actually, this is probably a good place to pause the video, because we should take a look at the property list as well, because this is, yeah, as I said, going to be very handy at some point. All right. So what we did determine here is that even though I didn't think that we had access to translation on the component. It actually does expose that, so it is actually kind of interesting. So let's see what happens if I type in microphone and say this is false. Alright, so then it's gonna say it doesn't have the attribute translation because the microphone is I guess an audio device or something, and that doesn't have a translation, so in that case it's gonna throw an error here. Right. Anyway, that was kind of a mess. I'm sorry about that. Still learning, and yeah, I just learned something, so that's just great. So what happens if I just do this, and then it doesn't throw any error? Oh, that's great. So, in order to finish this off with just a little we should actually do something like this, because that way it's gonna be self-documenting. And that false here, it kind of annoys me that I don't know what it is. So I'm just gonna spend the last few minutes here on trying to figure out what it is. So we had this find objects by name. Just gonna quickly search for that in the documentation. And if you're watching this, you can safely just skip it. So false here, do not include the namespace in the search. Okay. Okay, so what does that mean? So we have a null here. I'm just gonna rename this and say namespace. So namespaces, add namespace. How do I create a namespace? Add remove namespace. Okay, let's just add this UE4 to the namespace to this null here. So let's search for null again, and we have false, and it's going to give us this. So true, and then it's not going to give us anything. But then it is. Okay, so saying include space equals false. That means that it's not gonna look in the namespace. So if I type in, for example, include namespace, if I type in UE4, for example, like this, and search for all of these, it's not gonna give me anything. Huh. Okay, and what if I type in true? Yeah, okay. My head is not working. Obviously, if I say this probably means then search in namespace. So whatever we type in here is, when we set this true, it means that we are searching in the namespace. So I should maybe, just to make this clear for myself, call this search in namespace. Search for something in our scene. Well, yeah. So this is going to come in handy at some point, I'm pretty sure. So let's finish off saying it needs to be null. and execute. There we get it. Okay. And then if we set this to false, then it's gonna return our null again. But now we can say like this, and it's still gonna return the null, because it's only gonna, when it says search in namespace, it's not gonna take in the namespace into account. So yeah, that was a little bit about how to get access to that. So yeah, I'm gonna continue in the next, and until then, bye bye.